Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for another Control and Present session. We'll be recording today's session, so I'm going to put everyone on mute as they join. And of course, when we're done here, I'll be posting this to our YouTube page. It's been a busy summer for us here at Control+M. We've been working on our third go live in the last 4 weeks in 3 different countries. So I'm glad we were still able to find the time to share some Plex knowledge. In case you don't know me, I'm Patti Nowak, owner of Control+M Solutions. I was once a Plex customer and had such a great implementation experience that I quit my job to support Plex full time. I started Control+M in 2013, and I have assembled what I think is the greatest Plex team there is. Everybody who works for us has been in your shoes at one point. We've been customers and we've implemented Plex in many industries. We love the product, and we've all got about an average of 9 years experience. We're located all over the US and Canada, and we deliver Plex support in English, Spanish, and French. Okay, enough about me. Let's talk Plex. So here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about problems, errors in Plex, why they happen, and why the way that we fix them matters. Because there's always multiple ways to perform transactions in Plex. That means there's multiple ways to undo them. And just like those different transaction methods matter, so does the undoing. We're going to talk about some specific errors and the way that we feel that fixing them is the fastest, easiest, and least disruptive to accounting, inventory, and traceability. Well, nobody's perfect. I once heard a quality manager talking about how you cannot sort quality into a manufacturing process. He said that sorting generally only catches 85% of errors. Well, if you think that people only catch 85% of errors and that people are 85% accurate, errors are going to happen. And I like to view those as training opportunities. Your employees want to do a good job and they want to do the right thing, but errors can happen because of lost focus, maybe people finding workarounds or using shortcuts, or just going too fast. Some of the most common causes we see of production errors anyway, are shared control panels where people report to the wrong work center. But we rarely find one Plex workstation for every work center. Most work centers have to share a computer, and that becomes a hotbed for errors. Now, that doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It just means we want to take extra care to fix these things. Maybe people go too fast, use the wrong label for source material. Most of the time, we see that people making these errors don't understand the impact of their mistakes in other modules. Because Plex is fully integrated, mistakes in one place ripple to others. So we want to make sure that when you unwind transactions, we maintain integrity in those other modules that were impacted. What we want to avoid most is random inventory adjustments. In every manufacturing facility I've ever been to, and I've been to a lot, I see inventory adjustments, legitimate ones. Things happen, but if we start cluttering up our adjustment report with a bunch of fixes, then we can't truly understand the impact of real inventory adjustment. Things like yield or BOM errors that generally result in an inventory adjustment are good to see and understand and fix. But if your adjustment report is clogged down by unscrapping or unreceiving, etc., those real problems become harder to find. There's just too much noise. So in short, just adding or deleting inventory not only causes that lack of visibility in your true adjustments, it causes accounting chaos. So let's try to avoid that at all costs. I'm going to have all my screenshots and demos today in UX, not Classic. The only real differences are typically screen names and how we manage security. A great example of this is in Classic, you have the customer list, but in UX, it's called customers. So while that seems pretty benign, it makes the conversion to UX a little tougher at first, but I promise you, it's intuitive enough. And within about a week of using UX, you'll find it hard to go back to Classic. If I show you something today that you can't find in Classic, either email me or call me and I'll help you out. Also, I see there's quite a few food folks on the call. A few terms we should discuss before we go any further. I'm a metals gal. I will automatically say the word parts no matter how I try. But for food and bev folks, I mean items for you. So this is something that you sell to a customer or something that you purchase to turn into something you sell for a customer. In discrete manufacturing or metals, basically, those are called parts. In the food and beverage space in Plex, those are called items. And that can be confusing for a lot of folks because supply items like machine oil, O-rings, things used for maintenance are called supplies. Sometimes they're called items and sometimes called supply items. So in this case, if you're a food and beverage customer, whenever I say the word parts, think items for you. And if I'm talking about supplies, I'll take the time to call them supplies or supply items, just to level set. Second term I want to talk about is lot tracking. When I talk about lot tracking, I talk about the new Plex lot management module, not putting the tracking number, which is how Classic used to do it. Lot management is a new module in UX. And if you want to know more about it, email Jill, who you emailed to get invited to this meeting today, and let her know that you want to see a new lot management Control+M presents. We'd be happy to do that. All right, we're going to start with fixing production errors. It used to be in Plex when a production error was made, everything had to be unwound manually. It was really painful to undo the output container, delete the production records, remove the cost records, remove the check sheet, restore the source container quantity. I once asked Plex why they made it so hard to fix records back when I was a customer because I was constantly fixing records. And the answer came back, well, if we made it easy, how incented would the manufacturing floor be to do things correctly? So instead of spending your time fixing errors, spend your time teaching. Well, that's a pretty lofty goal, but for many years, it's all we had. Now we've reached a happy medium where it's a little bit easier. So we'll start with the simple ones and we'll move to the more complex. If you underreport production, simply report the remaining job quantity either into the same container. You can load up an existing output container, or you can produce into a new one and merge them together. All your traceability will still be functional and your actual costing will still be correct. If you report production at the wrong status, you can just go ahead and update the status on that container, either using the sort container function or by updating the container directly. If somebody logged in and out of a job too quickly, you can adjust these records manually. So you can edit, for example, the cost record, the overhead record through the Workcenter log and the production and history. You can update the actual record itself. You're going to want to do this if you're using OEE, daily shift report, rolling average report, that type of thing to manage your actual production time. I'll be honest with you, it's a painful process. And if you're using actual costing, you have to remember to go back and update those actual cost records. Otherwise, your gross profit is going to be wacky. Some people use a polka yoke that makes operators report their quantities twice, and that does have a tendency to reduce some errors. But if you aren't using that, you might like the production correction button, which we're going to go deeper into in the next few slides. As I always say, we don't want a random inventory adjustment. It not only causes report chaos, but in this case, it's going to bypass labor and overhead absorptions, which means your products are going to look like you made them more profitably, but you really didn't. I could get deep into costing on this, but I feel like half of you guys would bail off this call if I did. So if you want to know more about that, hit me up. Otherwise, just trust me on this one. The production correction button is pretty cool. The output container quantity goes to 0, lot trace records are deleted, and the source materials return back to the original container. If you did use a supply item on your bill of material, it'll be set back into the count if you're tracking counts on supply items. The production and cost records are deleted, but it's important to note that the check sheet is not. We have confirmed that this does work with actual costing as well as standard costing. And there's some awesome documentation out there about this function. And I'm going to show you that right after we see the production correction button in action. There are a couple of limitations with this, and they're there for good reason. If an accounting period is closed, whether it's a hard close or soft close, we can't use production correction. And if a container was adjusted or consumed, we can't unwind that either. The container of 0 pieces remains active, so to keep things tidy, you'll want to deactivate it. And since the check sheet is not deleted, that means your SPC data could be skewed, so you're going to want to get rid of that too. This is security controllable for a very good reason. Not everybody should be able to do it. And multi-out production is a little bit more challenging to fix, but it's not used all that frequently. So I'm going to recommend that you check the community for details on that or hit me up directly. This was originally known as the oops button. It's really called production correction, but I say this because if you search the original ideation post in the community, you'll see it in there. So let's actually see this in action. Go to the control panel, and we're on a work center called the labeler. And when we go to the production history here, we can see that in the last couple of weeks here, we've done production. So we've done some production today and some last week. If I try to correct this, when I hit production correction and answer, do you wish to undo? The system's going to tell me that this could not be reversed. And that's because my period has been closed. So I'm going to click my back button here, go back into production history, and I'm going to undo a current record. When I highlight this record and hit production correction, you will see that this will undo it and it will not give me an error. It'll simply tell me that that has now been taken care of. And I had a supply item usage on here in the bill of material, but no actual parts themselves. So pretty darn easy to do. So let's talk about our next issue, scrap. People accidentally scrap sometimes, and to level set, remember, scrap is not the same as defects. Defects are a temporary condition that might either become scrap or they might become good with rework or sorting. If you accidentally change something to a defect status and it shouldn't be, just change the status back. It's pretty easy. That can be permission controlled too. So back to scrap. Scrap is something that goes in the garbage or it's sold for scrap value. And there is no unscrap button. You can delete the scrap record, but that won't reactivate the container and it won't unwind what happens in accounting. So what we end up doing is manually reactivating the container with a specific reason code for unscrapping. And I'll show you why in the next couple of slides. We want to make sure that you involve accounting if you decide to do this, because there will be a financial impact that I'm going to show next. To understand why this matters for accounting, let's look at the accounting impact when you do a scrap transaction. So the top transaction on this table is a scrap at control panel, which did a debit to account 54300, which is scrap, and credited inventory. Then when I did my adjustment record, I put the inventory back. So that reversed correctly. But the offsetting expense side went to the inventory adjustments account. So because of this, what happens is our inventory adjustments is high and our scrap values our scrap value is overstated because it's not offset by that. To fix this, it's pretty easy to control. We use a setting in Plex called the cost account dimensions. And then we tell Plex, when you have an unscrap reason code for adjustments, instead of just putting it to the inventory adjustment account, you're actually going to offset the scrap account instead. So that's a really terrific option there, easy to set up. I'll show you the setting here in Plex. The cost account dimensions here, you can define transactions for SCAR by any of these reasons. Again, I could do a session just on this. If you're interested in costing on the third dimension setting session, let me know. Okay. Now you can see once I've made that change, my scrap debits 54300 and my unscrap, my reason code credits 54300. So if you want to know more about this, we're going to talk about this adjustment reason code and driving the general ledger a little bit and for a couple of different reasons today. I'd be happy to put on a session for that. All right, next let's move on to fixing lots and heats. So remember, this is all about the UX lot tracking module, not the tracking number in Classic. To change a Classic tracking number, just open the container and edit it. Lot tracking is most useful for expiring items, like in food and beverage. If you are using the new Plex lot tracking module and you fat-fingered a lot number when you entered it, they cannot be renamed. Still, it's pretty easy to fix. You can either create a new lot number, the right lot number, and then you can use the split container screen to reassign and create a new one at the same time or reassign to an existing one. Same thing if you received against the wrong lot number, that's easy to fix. You can either unreceive, which we're going to see in a few slides, or we can just split to a new lot number. Now, the split container field is going to allow, our screen will allow splitting to a newer existing lot. It's by far the easiest way to change lot numbers. These fields show up on the normal split container screen that you're used to using for the last couple of years. And they're only going to show up if the part or item is marked lot required. So they're automatic if the part's lot required. That means if you don't see them, what you need to do is check that part or item record to make sure that lot management is lot required is checked. Fixing heats is pretty easy, but you can actually change those directly in the heat system. Some people use heat numbers and some people use heat codes. The reasons behind that are somewhat complex and they're specific to typically people in the metals industry. So I don't want to bore everyone on this call with it. If you want to talk about why you use heat codes versus heat numbers, just go ahead, email me or call me and we can talk about that. Heats are generally used in metals, but they're a great easy traceability option for everybody. Anytime you need traceability to your parts, but you don't have expiration dates, heats are an easy way to do it. Now, you can change a heat code on a container, but be wary of the traceability impact here. If you change a heat on a source container that's already been used, Plex is not going to go back and change the heat automatically on the output containers. It's not a dynamic link, it's just a copy. So the minute your output container is created, it pulls a copy of the heat code out of the source container and jams it into the output container. Well, if you change the heat on the source, it doesn't go out there and change those. So if you do have to change a heat on a source container, then you're going to want to look at the traceability tree of that source container and update all those output containers on there as well. The nice thing is if you have to change a heat code value or a heat number value, you can do it right in the heat management system. You can rename heat codes very, very easily. Next up, let's talk about fixing different kinds of shipments. We'll start off with customer shipments. If you accidentally hit the ship button for a customer order, most times you can just unship it. If you're using truck shipping, the entire truck is unshipped. The button is there and it's not at the shipper. If you're using customer shipping, then the unship button is going to be right on the shipper. And the unship button, whether it's used at the truck or the shipper, is going to return that truck or shipper to a ready to ship status. And the inventory is going to come back on the books and the AR invoice is going to be voided. Why would the unship button be missing? I get that question all the time. Well, if your invoice has already been printed, you won't see the unship button. Now, that's a pretty simple change. Just go back to the invoice and change the status to not printed. But if you've already communicated that invoice to your customer, you're going to want to advise them. You want to check that this prevent unship by period setting is on, and it's typically on. That means a shipper has to be unshipped in a period that has the display flag on. And by the way, you might want to enable the data change scheduler to soft open and soft close periods automatically. That'll make your accountant's life a lot easier. If you want to know more about that, hit me up. And if you're trying to unship consignment inventory that's been used, you have to first unuse those containers, which we'll cover in a few slides. So to unship, it's pretty simple. Here are the unship buttons in truck shipping at the top and in customer shipping in the bottom. So let's go see it in action. In our PCN, we use truck shipping. So I'm going to look at truck shipping this week, and you'll see right here, this is a shipment that went out yesterday. If I click on this truck here, I have the unship button available. If I look at some older shipments, let's take a look at shipments for the year or last 90 days. Oh, no more. If I had an older shipment in here, I would not see the unship button. That's because my periods are closed. We'll see if we got a really old one in here. Yep, here we go. Got one on 5/3. When I click here, I will not see the unship button because that period is closed. So pretty simple stuff here. You'd think about that after explaining how undo works on a shipper to put inventory back and reverse accounting, that it would update the EDI via the same method. Not every shipment creates an EDI transaction, and when it does, it becomes a standalone process. Now, if you've ever attended any session I've ever done, I'm the first one to tell you I can barely spell EDI. So what I'm telling you now, I got directly from the horse's mouth. Veronica actually wrote the script for the slide for me. If you want more information, Veronica's email is on this slide. If your customer accepts an XMIT cancel, it should be sent as soon as the unship is possible, as soon as possible after the unship is done, if the next shipment is going to change the quantity or price. This will void the transaction and allow you to send a new one. Not many customers accept this type of transaction, and more often you're going to have to pick up the phone and call the customer to tell them an invalid transaction was sent. Be aware that shipping again can send duplicate documents to the customer, and there are various ways to control what and how to resend. It would be best to discuss this directly with Veronica, not me. I won't be able to help. Sorry. All right, on using customer consignment inventory. Now, to level set, when I say customer consignment, I mean when you ship parts or items to a customer, but you don't invoice them until the customer reports usage. If you accidentally use inventory, whether it's the wrong part, container, or quantity, you can simply unuse them. Now, there are some settings that you're going to have to consider when setting up and using consignment inventory for your company, because Plex now lets you leverage part units and price units if you want. And you can report usage by FIFO or containers. Again, please don't just adjust inventory in and out or ship more. That's probably the worst way to fix things because of the invoicing impact and the traceability impact, as well as the customer inventory levels. So let's take a peek at some of the customer inventory here. We've recently used some of this inventory here. We've got 500 there. Now, if I want to unuse the stuff that I've used this morning, I'm going to click on container detail, and I'm going to click on usage history here and click my search button. Once I do that, I can click here and say unuse. Again, similar options for this as there are for unshipping regarding period controls, etc. All right, next up, let's talk about fixing receipts. Remember, receiving is a two-step process. First, we receive, and then we finalize. The finalize step is what puts containers into inventory at a usable status, and it creates the accounts payable record. If you've done these two steps in error, it's pretty easy to unreceive. You can see what happens in the background here by, the container goes back to the finalized screen, AP record is unwound, etc. If you should never have received at all, you kind of have to do the unreceived twice, once at the history screen and again at the finalized screen, which we'll go through in just a minute. If your system does not behave the way ours does, check the setting called container receipt delete. We don't recommend using this because we don't love deletes. We'd rather teach people how to do the transactions manually than delete them. So let's look at our unwinding our purchasing receipts. And we've got a purchasing receipt today here for 100,000 items here. I'm going to click right on the shipper and I'm going to say unreceived checked containers. Now see, this container is number 639. Once I receive these, my AP invoice has been unwound and these will go back to the finalized screen. So if I look at finalized receipts here, my container is back here waiting to be adjusted and received. But what if I never wanted to receive it? What if I really didn't want to do this at all? Once I click in here, I can unreceive here, and then that's completely rewound. I'm not going to because we often use these half-done transactions for training. So remember, again, if your system does not behave this way, you want to make sure you check this setting, container receipt delete at unreceived. We don't recommend it, but some people have it on. All right, let's talk about supply items. Remember the maintenance kind of stuff. There are two ways to unreceive. The first is when you track quantities of a supply item. And that's driven by the flag called value inventory on the item category setup table and the flag marked update when you receive the supply item. You can use both methods to manage supplies. It's by supply item number. So you might need to use both of the methods that I'm going to show you. First, you're going to want to void the AP invoice. Then you're going to go to the purchase order. You're going to filter by purchase order number and edit the items, click the line items, check receipt history, and on receive. So let's go see that in action. I'm going to look for my payable invoices. And if you're in Classic, this would be supplier invoices. And I'm going to look at my invoices that were created today because all the transactions for today were done today. And here's my invoice. First thing I need to do is void this. And once it's been voided, I can go to my purchase order. And I'm going to look at purchase order number 23. And on here, I'm going to click and edit my items. I'm going to go to line items. I'm going to click the line and say receipt history. I'm going to highlight this line and on receive. So fairly simple. It's a few more buttons than you might want to click, but it works really, really well. Now, if you're not tracking quantities of supply items, so that means the item category is not marked value inventory and the update when received is not checked, that means Plex never has any idea how many of those supplies you have on hand. So it thinks you have 0. For that reason, you can just void the AP invoice, then go back and update the purchase order and the release line to on order. If you try to use the method that we had on the last page, you're likely going to get an error because Plex wants you to reduce the count that you're unreceiving from 0. So it wants to go negative. Now, you can get past this with a setting called usage to negative, but we never ever suggest that. Why? Well, because negative inventory is a lie. You don't go to Subway and see negative 3 loaves of bread on the counter, do you? And what do I always say about Plex? Plex is like your mother, and when you lie to her, she knows and she's going to make you pay the price. All right, accidentally receiving supplier return. Unfortunately, there is no easy button for this, but basically what you're going to do is you're going to search for the return, highlight and edit the line, change the quantity to 0, and there's going to be a couple questions popping up depending on your configuration. And you want to make sure that you go back and avoid any credit memos that have been issued. So let's go see this undone. We're going to look at customer returns. And we've got a few customer returns out in our system here that we have received. So here's my customer return here, line. And in here, we're going to change this to 0 pieces. Once I apply here, we're going to see a pop-up and it's telling me exactly what we need to do for this. So we need to go back and change the quantity, the reject. If there's a credit memo, we need to change all of these. Plex is telling you flat out that I'm not going to do that for you. You have to go do it. And I'm going to click OK here. And now that will unwind my customer return. You'll see it has 0 pieces received against it again, instead of 100. Okay, let's talk supplier returns next. If you accidentally ship something back to a vendor that didn't actually go out, once again, there's no undo on here. The supplier return creates a general shipper. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to return that general shipper. But we need to also then go back and do some things with the container as well. So we have to actually go through and reactivate that container because it's no longer gone. Now, when we do that, the system will naturally debit inventory and credit inventory adjustments where we should actually be hitting the PPV account for this because when we received it, we debited PPV. So we want to make sure that that gets unwound correctly. Again, you'll want to use costing in the 3rd dimension for this. And also any supplier return debit memos that were created, we'll want to do that as well. Let's take a peek at that in supplier returns. So we're going to take this supplier return here and we're going to pretend that we never actually shipped it out. We're going to click on this general shipper 2. Oops, sorry about that, guys. We're going to ship on this general shipper 2 and we're going to delete the shipper. Now, again, that deletes the shipper, but it does not close the return, nor does it do all the inventory adjustments. So we'd have to go back and re-edit that container. And if we ever do want to return it to the customer, we need to go into this supplier and change the status from shipped to okay to ship. Now, our status is called okay to ship. Yours might be called something else. So I'm going to change that. I see someone's got a quick question in chat. Oh, somebody said wanted to know PPV was. Great. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that. All right, next up, let's talk cycle counts. Fixing cycle counts is really easy. If you have automatically generated cycle counts, many times, Plex can automatically generate your cycle counts by weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannually, and annually. So if you started those automated cycle counts, but didn't really get your cycle count moving in time, a lot of times people have old cycle counts hanging around, or if you're in the middle of a cycle count and you realize that it's a mess, we can actually restart it. Whatever you do, please don't click the complete button in a cycle count without clicking account for first. The way that Plex is naturally set up to work is to say, when I don't find something in a cycle count, put it into a special area, and then your inventory control team is going to want to be responsible for looking at that special area. Now, if you don't click the account for button, everything in that cycle will go to the special area, and you're going to have to try to figure out what got there and when. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let's say that we're not going to perform this cycle at all. I can just delete it. Nothing was done on it. It's okay to just delete it. But if you're in the middle of one, let's check this one here for us. This is a cycle for a part type of raw material. If I start it and I'm in here in this cycle, you can see I've got a bunch of containers that are all unaccounted for. Let's just say that I've found all but the top 3. And I click account for. This is where I'm saying, if you just hit complete, every one of these containers is going to go to your, no zip sorting bin, so to speak. Once I click account for, you'll see that these containers have been accounted for and I can no longer change them. I could still play with the top 3 containers, but the ones that are accounted for, all we have to do is just tell, these are good now. We can let Plex know. And I see all these have 0 quantities, which looks like we'll probably have to talk to somebody on my team about this. Now, let's say that this cycle count, these were either done in error or we want to start over. What we can do basically is hit this reset button. And the reason you'd want to do that is because if you're keeping statistics on your cycle counts, then you will want to make sure that those statistics are accurate. And an inaccurate cycle count could really send your material folks wild. Somebody asked about the customer returns. Does this work with the VP screen that supports multiple items on one RMA? Yes, that's the screen we're using. I just didn't have any with multiple items on them. So that's really the classic question too as well. So great question. All right, next up, fixing accounting errors. Look, I don't want to bore all the non-accounting people here, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. If you accountants want to talk more about just unwinding accounting transactions, email me and we'll do a deeper dive. So voiding an AP check is pretty simple. The system does a reversed entry in open periods, or if the period is closed, then there's an offset record created. We don't ever recommend the delete buttons for checks. You can't void the check that's been marked cleared with a Plex bank reconciliation. We never recommend setting up your system to delete anything in accounting because it's difficult to pass an audit. If you're like me and you've been around accounting for a long time, you used to work with old ledger paper, we're always taught in accounting classes that you don't erase anything, you draw a line through it. So it doesn't look like you're trying to hide anything. The delete button is akin to using the eraser for an entry on ledger paper. So to void the check, you just basically go to the payment register, look for it, click it, and say void. And if you want to void a check that was in a closed period, there's a setting called the closed period void. It's got to be on. And all the activities happen in current period. So you're not going to throw your previously published financial statements off. Deleting a deposit is probably the easiest thing to do. Just go to the deposit screen and find the deposit and delete it. Your invoices that were paid on the deposit are going to go back to an unpaid status, and your bank account balance will be reduced by the amount of that deposit. Again, it's pretty simple, and you cannot delete the deposit once it's been reconciled with your bank. And that makes perfect sense to me because that'll throw your bank off. Deleting a journal entry, again, it's like erasing from your journal entry. So we recommend doing reversing journal entries, and it's a really easy thing to do. To reverse it, just fill in the reversing period field, and Plex is going to create a reversing entry. If you enter the current period, it happens immediately. And finally, to unvoid an AR invoice or a customer invoice in Classic, just go to that screen, find your invoice, click on it, and you should see an unvoid period. Again, unvoid button. Again, it's going to be dependent on your configuration and your periods, whether or not they're open. So lots of undo options, but let's talk about some things that you really can't undo or things that are really hard to undo. The delete is forever. Honestly, I try to remove it from everything except shippers and maybe check sheets for the production correction option. Once a record is gone, it's really gone. Plex can't bring it back, nor can you, nor can I. So hide those delete buttons. Deleting containers and cost models are probably the most dangerous things you can do. Use those active buttons, not a delete button. You cannot change names on a subcontracting location. You can't uncheck lot required on a new part once it's been checked. And then once it's been checked, it's going to be available for all parts all the time. So if you check that, you'll always have to have a lot set up. Now, remember, lots have to have expiration dates available to them. And I had a customer once who insisted they had to use lot tracking in Plex because they called their traceability lots. Their stuff never expired, but they would frequently forget to put expiration dates in and call me up and say, why can't I ship this stuff? It's because there was no expiration date on their, a previous expiration date or no expiration date on their lots. So I turn that off for our new customers if they don't need it. Dynamic control plans, once that's been checked, cannot be unchecked for a part. If you use the lot conversion tool, it cannot be undone. That's because expiration now goes to the lot, not to the container. And it converts your tracking number to a lot number. There is no unwind on that. So make sure that you really test this if you're considering using that. Another thing to think about is you can't call back or unsend something that is sent via a Plex email transaction log. Some things that are ugly to do. Updating productions manually is painful because the close of one record is dependent on the start of the next one. So you have to be careful about how you change those. Updating cost records is also very painful. You need to remember that a produced item could have hundreds of cost records associated with it. Best example is $0 POs, which kind of drive me crazy. Unless you are buying things for $0 from somebody, your PO should have at least a good estimated price on it. If you have $0 POs in an actual costing environment and you see a lot of, if you receive a lot of source materials and then you use them, all your output containers are going to have $0 material costs, which means you're going to look more profitable than you really are. Renaming values on setup tables. I was once at a customer doing an on-site visit when the safety manager came running in yelling that yesterday David fell down, bumped his knee, and needed a Band-Aid. Today, when I look at the injury log record, it says that he lost his hand and went to the emergency room. What the heck happened? How could this change? And here it turned out that somebody in their corporate office who wanted to normalize those tables, they wanted the first thing on every record, body part record, to be the head, then the neck, then the back, then the arms, and the rest. So they just went through and changed everyone's injury tracking records, or injury tracking setup tables for body parts and treatment. Well, I looked and saw right away what had happened, but to undo it, I had to click on every setup table value, look in the history, find out what it used to be, go change it back, and then educate the team on why that was a problem. So it was really quite a painful exercise. You can't change provisional role names. So things like machine operator or maintenance user, even if you're going to UX, if you're on Classic now and you want new security in UX, you're going to create new roles. Don't change the machine operator or the maintenance user. I've never tried this. It's possible if you change them that you could change them back. It might work, but I've never tried. Problem control forms are easy to break, so be careful with those. I'm no expert on those, so I've just seen them broken and had to call someone else on my team to fix. Also, upload files sometimes update data, sometimes don't. You're going to want to make sure that before you do any big massive uploads, that you're comfortable with the data that's there. And finally, on EDI loads, there is no undo button. You can only delete the transactions and start over. So tons and tons of material today. I want to open it up for questions that you might have or fixes that you know about that I might not have covered. And just a reminder, everybody is on mute, so you'll have to unmute yourself to be able to ask questions or use the chat. So Bill says, is it possible to upload and test? Absolutely. And if you're a Control+M implementation customer, we're going to have you do every single upload ever into test. In fact, we're working with a new client right now that's uploading their data into test daily. It's awesome. It's the best way to test there is. We also have a document somewhere, somehow I'd have to dig it up, that talks about what fields get updated when uploading parts, routings, approved suppliers, work centers, etc. So if you want, I can try to dig that up. Just email me if you're looking for that document. What other questions you got? No questions? All right, 2 weeks from today, I'm going to be putting on a presentation about inventory by container specification. We used to be called dimensional inventory, but imagine if your work is done with bar stock or sheet stock, and you have remnants or off-fall, you can look at an inventory screen that shows you, oh, I normally work with 10-foot bars, but I've got a 6-foot bar and a 4-foot bar. Let's use those 2 bars up, and we can control them within the system. Now, we've seen them used for width, length, and gauge, but also we've got some food and bev customers using them for things like moisture content in ricotta cheese, fat content in dairy. So what this means is if I order 4% milk fat cottage cheese and I specifically measure it and it's 4.23%, I can actually report that within allowable ages. So this is great for anytime you want to use the same part number with varying physical characteristics. So we're going to talk about doing that in 2 weeks, and I hope that I'll see a lot of you there. We'll stay on the call for just a few minutes in case anyone has got some questions. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I hope you have yourselves a great day.